Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success Podcast with me, Christian Harris. I'm joined today by Georgina Poole, who is based in Australia. She very kindly spent an evening recording this podcast with me. We talk about the Australian safety scene. We talk about blame and what we can do to overcome this focus that sometimes people have on blame after an incident. We speak about HOP, human and organizational performance. We talk about writing books, and we talk about podcasts, and we talk about personal branding. A really varied and rich conversation with Georgina that I'm sure you will enjoy. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success Podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week, we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints, and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Well, I quite like to start with something like sort of emotive or personal. So is there anything that happened for you that got you into safety, or any sort of story, or do you know what I mean? So like me, I got run over by a car, so that's obviously quite a good one to talk about.
No, mine's a non-emotive story that got me into safety. So I was a primary school teacher, and I met my husband, who was husband to be at the time, who was working in the prison system in Brisbane. And he had applied for a role as a train driver in central Queensland, which is where the coal mine, basin and area is. And so I interviewed as a teacher for the local primary school as 35 children, one teacher, and it's multiple year levels and grades and ages in the one classroom. And in that interview, the principal said to me, it's going to be so great having someone fresh out of uni who can fix our photocopiers and get our printers and our tech up and running. And it's a terrible story because at that point, teachers were only earning a very low amount of money. I was fresh out of uni and I was moving to a mining town where it was quite well known that you didn't need any skills or experience, but you could earn a substantial amount of money. So I basically gave up my teaching career and applied for a safety admin role in a mine site. And I was one of only 5 or 6 females on a mine site in central Queensland, but the pay was $25,000 more with 0 qualifications and 0 experience. And I don't know what it's like in the UK, but at that time, the market wasn't saturated with safety professionals or safety people. And so the day that I started, there was a higher up safety person who left and they couldn't find anyone. So it was like, you're it, Georgina, you shadow our, superintendent, you follow him around and learn everything, even though you're only the admin person. And so that kind of started my, getting to know people and then having those really robust conversations and starting to really enjoy having to change tactics, seeing what works, what doesn't work, and that real learning perspective on things. So it's not emotive, I'm sorry, it's more money orientated.
No, it's okay. There's money in safety. I tell you what, we're just going to carry on from there because we'll just start from there, because that's
Okay,
rather than
no
getting you to
problem.
tell that story again.
Yeah,
we were planning to have a professional start to the podcast, but instead we'll just go into it because it's
no
good.
problems.
It's good fun to do that. What's good about that is that it shows that you can make good money in safety, and that's obviously one of the things that people, would care about. Because I think, to answer your question here, we do have. I think we've got a good supply of safety professionals, but it's very much skewed towards older men, and so we are starting to find that we need to kind of replenish and get people more interested in it. And actually it'd be interesting to see whether there's a scenario like that where teachers, by the way, here aren't paid very well. My sister's a teacher, so I can tell you that for a fact. But whether there's more we can do, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, we have a saying. It's very similar markets in Australia, men predominantly, male, pale, and stale.
Stale. Yeah, I like that expression. Yeah, I did. I did a podcast. I did a podcast recently with an insurance broker, and it was a video podcast, and there were 5 of us on this panel, and we were the definition of male, pale, and stale. I actually was joking about we should start a boy band and that should be our name and stuff
That
like
should
that.
be.
But it was a good conversation. But yeah, it was a bit of a shame. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I try on the podcast and all the content I do to obviously get as
most
much
definitely.
diversity and stuff as I
Yeah,
can. But
yeah.
um, it's not it is a challenge. I mean, I remember speaking to Louise Hosking, and she said to me, do you know Louise or?
I know the name, yes.
Yeah. So she said to me, oh, we've made great strides in equality, gender equality in safety,
Yeah,
and I was expecting her to say, 35%, 65% or something like that, and she said it was like still in the low 20s. I was like, wow,
yeah,
that's even worse
yeah,
than I
yeah.
thought.
Yeah, that's a pretty common number in Australia too. In fact, that's the goal is to like 22, 25%. Most
Yeah,
organizations over here are still between 8 and 15,
right, okay,
striving for the 20s. Don't get me
yeah,
wrong, the conglomerates, your bigger,
yeah,
mining or, rail, etc., do aim higher.
yeah,
But it's you see on social media a lot, right? The same as what I see when you see, the lecturers get together or the
yeah, yeah,
people in
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
particular field and you try to spot like, okay,
yeah,
but it's not even female, it's diversity in general.
yeah,
Like
exactly,
you're
yeah,
looking for LGBTIQ, you're looking for the colored, you're looking for, people who come from various backgrounds. And I
mm.
think sometimes we forget about that diversity at the table.
Yeah, yeah. Even and I don't want to um I don't want this to come off in the wrong way because I don't want to downplay what you've just said because you're absolutely right. But also I would say diversity of background, experience, and opinion
Oh,
as
no,
well.
no,
I
no.
think
No, no, 100%.
yeah,
Yeah,
because all these conferences, it's the same old faces
it
talking about the
is.
same old
Yeah,
stuff,
it is.
again and again and
Yes.
again. In my experience,
Yes, most
which
definitely.
yeah, so you're sort of creating this echo chamber, which isn't ideal. We're talking a bit about Australia, so I was going to ask you actually because you're obviously very, you're from Australia, you're very involved in the Australian safety scene. It feels very, to me, very vibrant. There are lots of kind of thought leaders, there are lots of people doing exciting stuff. It seems like there's a lot going on. Is there something that's kind of driving that, would you say? Is there something unique about the Australian safety landscape or culture or community?
Um, I don't think there's something. I think it's each individual consultant or thought leader in this space is really passionate about what they believe in. And so when you crisscross paths, and I've had some recent interactions with other consultants like in the field as well, it comes across to listeners or people, or members of the public like rivalry. But it's
Mm,
really because we're all so passionate about, what it like you, right? Like, slips, trips, and falls, you're passionate about it, you've had lived experience. Me, I'm passionate about human performance because I had to change the way I spoke to people. I had to be curious to get influence and to actually, live through my mining, career kind of thing. So I think what's driving it is we're all striving to be someone or do something in the field as
mm,
opposed to something driving it. It's individual
yeah,
people driving that change to make a difference, I feel.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it does come across like rivalry, but realistically, if we all kind of got together, we'd realize we're all working towards the same goal, right? Like it's to make a difference in the life and to make a workplace safer at the end of the
yeah,
day for our
yeah,
workers.
yeah. I think there might be something about the Australian mentality, or I don't know. Like I'm quite into because I've got my own business. I care a lot about marketing and how to grow a
Yeah.
business and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
And in that space, it's very similar. There are sort of uh, pro rata. There seem to be more Australian people that are kind of doing good, great stuff in that area than there are
Yep.
British people, for example. I don't know if
Yep.
maybe it's something about like just in that way of having that confidence to assert your opinions and stuff. Maybe we're too standoffish as
Yep.
Brits.
No, yeah, and I think the other thing is that we're all keen to like learn not just about like personal branding, like where we learn about LinkedIn strategies, we learn, and amongst those of us, and including yourself, Christian, like when you post, kind of like what works, what doesn't work, times of day, there's out we're conscious of not just the message that we're driving, but also how that message might land depending on certain things, that social media has in place as well. So it's almost like we treat it not only as the message that we're driving, but it's a business at the end of the day. Like our personal brand is our business, and we're passionate about that. The Australian mentality is to give it a right go, and we're very determined people. And, like, as you were talking, I'm thinking that's probably it. Like we're like a
Mm.
dog with a bone and we won't let it go. And sometimes it feels like, man, there's so many like Australian consultants just saturating, like social media or the market or whatever it is. But we're all like hanging on for tooth and nail to something that we really strongly believe in and trying to push that
Yeah,
message
yeah,
out there.
yeah,
And it does come across, especially when you're in amongst it. Sometimes it does feel very cutthroat. Like, yeah,
yeah.
everyone's vying for that space of real estate.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't get that sense looking at it. I don't get the sort of rivalry piece. I mean, obviously that people have disagreements and whatever, but I don't feel like it's that. Just think it just feels like there's a vibrancy and a sort of
There
intensity
is.
and just
Yes,
positivity, I suppose,
there is. Yeah,
which is quite
they're
infectious. Yeah, I mean,
100%. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I've said this before, but I always just say to people, get involved on LinkedIn and do some of this, put your thoughts out
Yeah.
there, and because I
Yeah.
think I
Yeah.
think that even if you've got a job and your ambition is not to have your own business, but it's just to sort of build your career, it's going to
Most
help you.
definitely.
It's going to help you.
Oh yeah, and I think that's how. And I've talked to a few younger people that I've been mentoring recently about building personal brand. Even if you're a full-time employee amongst
Mm.
embedded in a business, if you want to be seen as a thought leader, then there is an element of building your own personal brand that comes along with just being embedded in that company. You still want to
Yeah,
be known.
yeah,
Yeah, so
exactly. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah, that's how you're going to get spotted and get those opportunities. Unless you just join when on the day that the senior person leaves, and then
Oh
you just
wow.
get
That
springboarded straight
wasn't
to the
an
top.
opportunity. I didn't see it at that at 22, one of only,
No,
4 or 5 females on site. I saw that as how am I going to cope and how do I survive? Like as you see Ron and Murray and those gentlemen, publishing about that survival kind of instinct.
yeah,
That was it was fight or flight, right? Like I had
yeah,
to do something to survive. It wasn't,
yeah.
oh, thank you so much for this learning opportunity. That was not my first thought.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly when you're younger, you probably look at it as a learning opportunity now, but you've
Now,
got more
yes.
perspective. Yeah, more
Yes,
perspective.
most definitely.
Yeah. So one of the things I was keen to talk to you about, Georgina, was sort of challenging some of the perceived norms because I know that's something you're quite strong on.
Yes.
Trying to sort of flip the script a bit, like
Mhm.
you know how useful are safety shares at the start of meetings. I know is something
Yes.
you've spoken about before. Yeah. So why do you think that these sort of things persist? And what should we do instead?
So I think a lot of the things persist because whether that be we as safety professionals, we as leaders, there's a few things. We fear the change, like we fear something different. And in that fear is that sense of it's comfortable for us to do what we've always done. And sometimes when you put yourself out on a limb and you do something that isn't backed by research, and we've seen people that comment on posts that don't have, justification or evidence for those new theories or new ways of doing things, that you do get, brought down, to ground, right? You get
Yeah,
smashed into the ground. So people don't want to put their hand up and say, oh, I'm trying something different, or I'm going to go out on a ledge and do something new. And that is why I feel some of those conferences globally won't go further than perhaps where they already are, because like it's a bit controversial. So I think people fear something different, but also when you've done something for so long in a certain way, you're comfortable, it's entrenched, and it is genuinely, like, physiologically, mentally hard to
yeah,
start to learn a new way to do things. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of people that understand that you have to meet people where they're at. And when we go into companies thinking we're going to create change, and, like, I'm certainly guilty of it when I first started out as well. It's like you go in thinking you have to change this, and this, and you need to do your whole, and transformation gets thrown around like it's a magical word that's going to happen. And you get shut down straight away. Whereas we know that to kind of make change, or to you need to meet people where they're at and then make
Yeah.
micro change occur, and then go bigger and scale it, etc. You can't just go in with all guns blazing and expect the change. But unfortunately, that's also what people are resistant to: massive change at one particular time, as well. So yeah, I'm passionate about it for a number of reasons, because I've seen what the change can do, firsthand. And so I'll champion the change, but I'm also very conscious that I've learned over time that you can't change the world tomorrow, and that you need to meet organizations and people where they're at first, and really take the time to build a relationship, understand what their fears are, and then, sounds really silly, take them on a journey. It's another buzzword, right? Like, but literally hold their hand and walk them through, and challenge along the way those conversations of, oh, but why should we do that, and play that devil's advocate. And that's kind of how I've seen it come about. But
yeah. No, I like a lot of what you're saying there is stuff that I talk about too. Meeting people where they're at, and also understanding that, if people if you're trying to sell, in inverted commas, something, influence a change,
yeah.
whatever it might be, you got to understand, if your audience knew everything that was inside your head already, then they would have already done it, right? So
Yeah,
it's
why
kind
would
of
they come to you?
yeah. So it's kind of, you've got to remember, like, where they are and what their level of understanding is, and also that a lot of what you've spoken about there is human emotion. So you've got to be
Most definitely.
mindful of, like, the psychology and the emotive nature
Yeah,
of changing people's
yeah.
ways of doing things, because, as you say, we're stuck in this habit. Who wants change? Everyone puts their hands up. Who wants to change? Nobody puts their hands up. That's the whole, that's the whole thing,
Most
isn't it? So it's not easy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and sometimes you have to bite your tongue too, right? Because, someone like me, I'm very passionate. And sometimes that passion is intimidating to someone, who's talking to you, or they're giving you responses, and the response is shocking, like, and you're in your head, you're like, how the hell did you just say, A, B, C, D, E? Or, you blatantly see something like a legislative breach, or, something it's so black and white, but you recognize that in that moment you have to meet them where they are, and you have to put your poker face on, and again go on that journey with them, and bring them to where almost lead them down the garden path.
Yeah,
So I think sometimes there's that element of, yeah, you have to check yourself before you wreck yourself as well, right? Like,
yeah,
just kind of check that you're not pushing your ideas because you're so passionate about a topic onto someone, and you take the time and structure it appropriately to
yeah,
give them the time they need to go on that journey with you.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, in my world, um, everybody knows about the risk, that they know about the problem that I can help them
Yeah,
to solve, but it's not necessarily top of their list, right? So you have to just sort of accept that,
yeah,
even if, I can sit here and see, and it's like smacking me around the face, like, you should be doing something about this. Well, you don't know what else is going on, what pressures are on them, what other
yeah,
priorities there are, so you
yeah,
have to
that's
sort of
right.
just, you have to kind of accept that you can't win every battle as well.
Yeah, that's true. Learn to
Mm.
pick your battles and understand which
Yeah,
ones you might win and which ones you just have to concede, right? Defeat.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We don't like defeat, but pausing
Oh.
of winning in the long
Yeah.
term, rather than
Yeah,
winning right now.
yeah, it's true. Like, I mean, pause. I also like to think that some of those losses are lessons learned as well, and like
Yeah,
that you wouldn't be where you are today unless you had some of those. I mean, don't get me wrong. When people talk about their life and like, is there anything you would, regret or not have happen? My answer is yes, because I have had some of those traumatic experiences that I would like to take away. But I think that some of those defeating workplace situations where you're on the floor, in a ball, help shape how defiant or how persistent or how determined you are now in your career. Yeah, those defeatist moments I still wouldn't take back, but the traumatic experiences of ugly crying at work, I would
yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. No,
Yes.
definitely with you on that. Yeah, I think it's a mindset, isn't it? About, like, being more of a scientist, I suppose, where if you
Hmm.
take a scientific mindset to whatever it is you're looking to deal with, um, I'm sure it maybe does happen occasionally, but I imagine 99.9999% of the time, a scientist doesn't solve the puzzle they're trying to solve on the first experiment, right? They do an experiment,
Yeah.
it doesn't work, they learn from it, they move on, they try it again, they learn
Yeah.
from it, they move on, and that's
Yeah. Correct.
that's life, right?
Yeah. Correct. Well, I'd like to
Yeah.
think so. I'm not sure. I'm not a scientist, so. But yes, and I couldn't be one. I'm too emotive.
No, yeah, but we can't win all the time. In other words, we have to accept that
Yes.
we will have learning opportunities, not let's not say
Hmm.
failures, learning opportunities where things won't go as well as we thought, and then we just kind of figure out, okay, what can we do differently? Right, let's try again, and just
Hmm.
keep getting
Keep
up. And
going.
that's where that passion that you spoke about is helpful because if you are really passionate about what you do, and I think that's something that all safety professionals share is a passion for keeping people
Yeah.
safe, etc. Then it helps you to get up the next morning and put your brave face on and start again.
Yeah. Go deal with the challenges of the day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
let's talk about decluttering safety. You talked about that before. What do you mean by that?
So, well, I want to say simplifying, but then there are, principles further along the safety science chain, if you can call it safety science. I've heard some controversy around that as well. That talk to the, not simplifying or the reluctancy to simplify. For me, it's more just whenever you have an event or whenever a failure occurs or whenever there's something that triggers a review process that, or you're doing a risk assessment, that you actually take the time to ask, what is the purpose of this procedure, this risk assessment, this document? Does it still serve its purpose? If we took it away, would anything bad happen? Like, is the world going to
Yeah,
end because we don't have it? Do we not achieve compliance, or do we not achieve legislative compliance if it doesn't exist? And if it doesn't meet, like those kind of criteria, then why is it in existence?
yeah,
And there's a lot of things I think in safety management systems globally, that we've created because it filled a need that you thought you had, but didn't actually exist. Or we had a knee-jerk reaction to an event that occurred, and you think having an extra bit of paper helps cover yourself when you're in court,
yeah,
but we haven't reviewed what we already have that exists to ensure that it's fit for purpose and does what it's required to do. We just added to it, or we created a new document in its place. So for me, decluttering is like not only perhaps removing that excess documentation, processes that you have, but even reviewing what currently exists and making sure that that is fit for purpose and user friendly as well for those frontline workers that at the end of the day are the ones who are going to be using it and making it work.
mm. You mentioned something there about like the legal setting, and I think that's been a driver of this problem, I would say, because
Yeah.
it's kind of like, have we got this proof? Have we got that proof?
Yeah.
Checklist
Yep.
here, checklist there.
Yep.
And actually, is that checklist adding any value? Probably not, like
100%.
really. And it's kind
Yeah.
of arse covering rather than trying to be
Yeah.
safer. And actually, if we were safer,
It's
then the thing wouldn't happen and then we wouldn't need to cover our asses.
Yeah. Well, it's the same in Australia. My argument is always we'll see court cases come up and they'll say, the organization didn't have the document in place, but then there's no mention of like the physical controls that were required to be in place as per the
Yeah,
document. So it's like, who cares? I couldn't care less if your paperwork was in order, but if you don't have edge protection on the roof, if
yeah,
your workers don't have their harnesses, then like the paper is nothing. What actually, my statement is that documents don't save lives. Hard controls do, right? So if you don't have those hard controls in place, couldn't care less what your piece of paper says. Like that's great,
yeah,
but if they're on a roof and they don't have what's required, like, but
yeah,
our court cases, we're seeing them come through, and it's like, the organization failed to have a safe work method statement. They failed to do a risk assessment. They failed, to have these documentary and that gives people a false sense of, oh, poo, I need to have 7,000 documents to meet my requirements. Meanwhile,
yeah,
their workers are going out and using, like their utes as areas to host inductions. And
yeah.
it's not appropriate, right? So
Yeah. Do you know Greg Smith?
yes, I do
You
know
yeah.
Greg very well.
yeah. So he spoke about that a bit in his book, didn't he? Proving Safety.
100%. Both books.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
even
both
Proving
books. Yeah,
Safety kind of, did the sequel to Paper Safe and, does talk a lot about metrics, which is something I'm passionate about as well. But yes, he is one of the key lawyers in Australia that definitely champions the idea of, this illusion of paper safety.
yeah, yeah. I thought
Yeah.
I thought you'd know him, but yeah, I interviewed him on the podcast as well.
Yeah,
Really good
it's great.
conversation. That's actually one of our most popular episodes, interestingly, because
Oh,
I
very
think
nice.
it 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 chimed with people about just the message. Because I think you know there's always I whenever I speak to a potential client, I always say, look, there's two sides to what I do, right? There's the part A is, can we reduce that risk and keep as many people safe as possible? And then part B is, in the event that we've done all that and something bad still happens, can we,
Yep.
help you with that evidence and so on? And people always care about both aspects, I think. So yeah, I guess that definitely is why that would be of interest to people.
Yeah, no, for
Um,
sure.
let's talk about hop. So, how you're a very strong advocate for human
Yeah.
organizational performance. How do
Mhm.
you explain the principles to maybe a skeptical leadership team in an organization? How would you go about doing that?
So the one thing that I've learned through doing things a little bit differently is to kind of remove the word safety from speak, basically. When you talk to operations and you talk to production and you talk to quality, for example, those things tend to hit home a little bit more. And so explaining the principles are principles. We don't expect you to recite the five, the seven, whatever. It's more just to kind of show that the philosophy has some things behind it. And if you're acting in a way that shows that you believe in your workers, that they're the solution, that they're the ones that, error is normal. If you act in that way, then you're doing hop. And, there are hundreds of, thousands of people currently probably doing hop right now out there, but they don't subscribe to every single principle. But yet, when there's an event, they're not blaming. They're putting learning processes in place. Like that's doing hop without labeling yourself as a hop advocate or a practitioner, right? So when I talk to leadership teams about what hop is, I'm saying it's a mindset, it's a philosophy, and all those silly buzzwords. But really, it's just a way of doing things that values and builds that engagement with your frontline workers and helps build that trust to get those better productivity, goals and to help you achieve what you want from an operational excellence perspective. I definitely don't say it's a safety program that your team are rolling out or it's going to help you reduce incidents. And there's been there's quite a lot of controversy over, can you prove that doing hop reduces incidents or can you prove that doing something equals this? When we wrote the book with Sydney Decker on metrics, we reviewed quite a lot of research around the world. And it's so hard to say that either you as a person or your programs, including HOP or anything, are genuinely tied to a reduction in incidents. So I personally and professionally would never make the claim that something I did ended with that result or that a HOP program ended in that. I can tell you that it might look like that, but I would never say that this is directly caused by this in the first instance. And I think if you're real with your leadership teams about that, you're not going to get slapped in the face with a fish. They're going to be open to discussing it more and experiencing what it might look like.
Yeah, yeah. I always use the analogy of sales with this because I think that if you're a sales director, um, you can't control how many sales you make, which it sounds a bit strange, but actually, what can you control?
True.
You can control,
Yeah.
how many calls you make, how many emails you send, the quality of
How many
the
people you hire?
proposals you
Yep.
do,
Yep.
yeah, and all of this sort of
Yeah.
stuff. You can control
Yeah.
those inputs and manage
Yep.
those inputs, but you can't necessarily control the output. And
Right.
so I always, whenever like I talk to people about this, to me, it's about right, what can we do to measure and sort of improve on those inputs. And then
Yeah.
if we manage that, the rest of it should sort of take care of itself. But there's always going to be
Yeah.
variables, aren't there? Things can happen that
Oh,
are
that's
outside of
right.
your control.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like you're going to commit to there being zero fatalities or, reduction in incidents, and then God forbid a meteor strikes, your part of the world and, you lose a whole, I mean, like those things
Yeah,
happen every day, right? You can never say that nothing bad is going to happen or mistakes are not going to be made or there's going to be zero harm at your organization because there will be harm. It happens
yeah,
every day. Yeah. You just can't say that.
yeah, yeah. How have you found sort of attitudes to blame? Because this is a topic that I am really interested in. Because I think particularly in my area, the first thing people do is try and blame the person that's fallen over. I'm
Yeah.
sure if it's in a different area of safety, maybe it's like I imagine it's similar in manual handling. It's
It's,
probably like, oh,
yeah.
they
It's
must
the
have they
same.
must have lifted incorrect,
Yeah, yeah.
rather than thinking about the other things. How have you sort of found that transition of trying to get people to move from away from blame?
So when the conversation comes up around, blame fixes nothing, I like to quote Todd Conklin talking about it's operationally unimportant, but emotionally important for you to blame. And there's a number like substitution tests, there's a number of things that come with it. But I find that when you start talking about responsibility versus accountability versus blame, the waters tend to get murky, but they are actually three different things. And accountability, as per what Sydney Decker refers to, is you want to share and tell your account. You don't want to pay and settle the account, right? So, and I also argued with Sydney during my postgrad calls because we were talking about holding people accountable. And I don't believe that you can hold someone accountable. I think you either are accountable or you're not. I don't think it's something that I can teach you how to be accountable. It's something you are. Like you recognize that you are accountable for a particular process, a role or whatever it is, and you show those behaviors through that recognition. I can't hold a knife to your throat and say, Christian, you are accountable for this. Like you can't be held accountable for it. So I think the difference between blaming someone is that blanket statement, like you stop at human error, that's it, and it's your fault that something has happened. Whereas accountability is you recognize, and responsibility is very closely aligned with that it was your space, your function, your whatever, and you're happy to own it. As yours. That's the accountability piece. Like recognize
Mm.
whether it's positive or negative, it could go either way, that you're accountable for it. And then responsible is it's one of those duties that was, fell in your remit. So I think sometimes when we talk about it, we murky the waters and people are like, I can't not blame you. When in actual fact, if you separate accountability, blame, and responsibility, you can knock out the blame part. I'm not saying knock out the accountability part under any circumstance. In fact, I advocate for people being accountable for their actions and I hold myself accountable for what I say as well, right? And same as responsible. But we seem to think in the hop space and the controversial parts to hop are we're saying no blame and people think we mean no accountability. That's not the case.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, look, you can blame somebody who's like a terrorist or something because they've had they've decided consciously to do something, but people don't consciously decide to hurt themselves at work or hurt their
That's what
colleagues at
I
work, do
mean,
they?
right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. And it's context driven as well. Like you use an extremist situation,
yeah, of
if you're
course, yeah,
talking about, yeah, like everyday situations, unless it's a sabotage event where someone intends the outcome, like I feel like there's so many disciplinary processes right now which are based on the intent of the action as opposed to the intent of the outcome, right? When I got into my car today and I pressed my accelerator down and then I sped, 2, 3, 4 kilometers over the limit and I wrapped my car around the pole. Should I go to jail? I've not injured anybody else, but should I go to jail because I sped 2 or 3 kilometers over and it ended in a bad outcome? That's the controversial question. Do we discipline over intent of action or intent of outcome? And you'll find most organizations are intent of action.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like no one comes to work
Mhm.
though to crash their car, to reverse into the
Mm.
bollard, to fall down
No,
a set of steps and put their back out for the next 6 weeks, right?
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
we discipline them like they did. we treat them like they did in an investigational process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, the lady that ran me over, I always say that I feel she was quite lucky because she could easily have killed somebody, and that would have been, and
Yeah,
she didn't mean to,
horrific.
it wasn't like she wanted to hurt somebody. She just, I don't know, I don't know exactly what happened, obviously, but something happened, and
Yeah.
a terrible event was the result of that. But it wasn't like she was. She definitely wasn't an ex-girlfriend trying to mow me down on the sidewalk. So
Thanks for
it wasn't deliberate.
clarifying that part,
Yeah,
Christian. Yeah, right.
definitely wasn't
Okay.
deliberate. Um, what so that's so that question about blame is one of the challenges around hop. Are there any other kind of misconceptions that you encounter and have to sort of overcome, and how do you go about doing that?
I think the main one is the lack of evidence, to be honest. And starting my PhD earlier on in the year, that's not only my drive to find perhaps those pockets of excellence where not that it's proven, because I don't think I'm going to be able to satisfy all the critics on the hop or the safety differently or the new view space, but certainly I've already interviewed a number of senior level executives who are doing hop, who are doing safety differently globally. And I have seen some really great results from them doing that, whether it's classed as academic empirical research by those critics that you see online, or whether it's suffice to someone like me to just give it a go.
Yeah,
That's what it is, right? But there's a huge space and a huge kind of question mark over is doing anything different. And by that, I mean any of those, the HOP, the safety differently, systems resiliency thinking, HRO, all of those new ways of doing things kind of still have this question mark over them as to whether or not there's justifiable evidence that they physically, and logically work. But those people who are embedded in companies right now who are trying to do something different, it's all driven by good intent at the end of the day. So I think my whole aim is to, one, find out who's doing something different, why, how is it working, and then give that back to those other people that are currently struggling in the community right now. Not that there will be empirical evidence, but I certainly know already through the interviews I've done that there are definitely some really great success stories. And I'm happy to stand behind success stories, even if it's not data that's got,
yeah,
methodologies that are appropriate for academia, or et cetera.
mm. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you here. I think that there's this kind of weird obsession about academic studies, which, and I just like, the world isn't an academic study. Like, it's real people and real
Well,
lives, and actually, you know,
yeah,
if
yeah,
we can show that something works in an organization, like, why do we need to
yeah,
write a paper about it for that to be relevant? And I think actually most CEOs are not going to have the time to read one of these papers anyway, or the
no,
interest
that's
to read one
right.
of these. But it's about kind of how can we engage. Going back to what we said about they're humans, right? How can we engage them with yes, some kind of data, but actually a story and a narrative that will get them to
Yeah.
buy into it.
Well, when I'm consulting and talking to client organizations, I actually give them phone numbers of people that are doing this. And
Yeah,
I say, you don't have to listen to me. Like, I'm just someone, trying to sell you something at the end of the day. But here's the phone number of John. And John has been doing this for the last 3 years. Give him a call. And I have a number of people, in my address book that are happy to do that for me. And we'll share not only the good things of doing the glamorous hop or the glamorous new view, safety differently, whatever, but we'll also explain the challenges and how they overcome those challenges and also where they sit currently. And I think if you're a CEO or you're, an executive that's looking for a change, you would like someone from industry or somewhere else in the world to kind of say, hey, I've walked the path that you're about to walk. Here's the things that, we experience. And for me, even if you don't end up using me as a consultant, I've done my duty because I've given you that connection. And you've seen how something could work if you choose to go down that path. It's not about whether you use me or not. It's about recognizing there's an opportunity to grow and learn. and you can see it being done by other people, and that's all that
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely with you on that one. Um, Last couple of things I wanted to ask you about was Random Noise book. Tell us a bit about that.
So co-authored with, the very amazing Sydney Decker, obviously, very controversial Sydney Decker as well. Came up with the idea for it whilst I was studying my postgrad qualifications at Griffith University under him, based off the idea was stemmed from that CSRA study on TRIR. And kind of debunking it, despite the questions that you might have seen on social media around its methodology and whether it stands its ground. I know nothing about what makes a really great research article, so I'm okay with whatever methodology Dr. Matt used and the rest of his team as well, and I'm very appreciative of all of that data that the CSRA put into the world. But Random Noise was a really great way to work with Sydney and kind of trying to raise questions. I'm not going to say the book debunks anything, but the idea was for anyone to pick it up, have a read, and take it to those people that perhaps make decisions for your business based on those injury metrics and just change the conversation. That's all. That was all it was going to do. I'm a firm believer. I don't actually believe that any book is going to hands down change the way you think about anything in particular, except for the Field Guide to Human Error, which definitely is the one that I've heard from a number of people, including myself, change the way I thought about investigations, human error, etc. But and I'm sure there are things in your mind as well that stand out for you from a reading or something you've seen as well. But you need things to challenge the way you think, whether that be somebody that plays devil's advocate in a risk assessment or a book that you can anonymously send, like Sam Goodman, the Hop Nerd, does to those executive leaders, and it just lands on their desk and they just open a page and they're like, maybe there is something more to this, right? Or someone annoying. I was facilitating for the NSC, National Safety Council, from the States the last couple of days in Sydney. And I could see as I was facilitating my little session that there were a number of people that were challenged by some of the things I said.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why you do it. I don't do it so that we're all sitting there like, yeah, cool, I agree. No. It's just to try and get you to think a little bit differently about it. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's why the
Yeah.
book was written, to just challenge it slightly.
Yeah. I have to say, Georgina, I'm disappointed because when you started saying, except for this one book, I was thinking, oh, she's going to talk about my book. But no,
Christian. Oh, it's a very close second.
just kidding. Don't worry, just kidding.
You could swap it out. Just cut that part.
Oh
Squash
well, yeah.
Sydney Decker.
I'll
Put
get an AI. I'll get an
Christian Harris
AI
in
to
it. That's
create
it.
some sort of video of you talking about
That
it. And
would
then
be cool.
the last thing I wanted to ask you about was podcasting. So,
Yes.
what sort of inspired you to do the podcast?
So I was embedded in organizations for quite some time, like basically my whole mining career. And then I started working for a consultancy firm, and they said they wanted someone with personal brand. And I had no idea what personal branding was. And it was my husband who had previously listened to podcasts. And he was like, I think you should start one. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. But for me, everything I do it's never about me. I don't feel like I'm anyone, and I don't feel like I want to be the face of anything. I always want to be able to share the learnings. And so interviewing people like yourself around the world and sharing their experiences, your thoughts and your ways of doing things, they don't have to align with mine. I just want to give back to the community and to industry and to the globe, really, those different ways of doing things, because there are people like me that when they were first starting out had no idea, and it becomes really lonely and very isolating and very overwhelming. And if you just listen to a there was no podcast when I first started out, if I just listened to a podcast or read a book or spoke to, someone on LinkedIn anywhere in the world, then I might not have felt as alone and as isolated as I did. And I would hope that from listening to my podcast, all 20 people that do tune into it would have that experience, right? Like, oh yeah, I listened to, Dr. Nick, Weatherly, and he's behavioral based science, but I talked to him. That doesn't mean because I'm HOP and he's BBS that we don't, share thoughts and opinions, etc., right? So it started because personal brand, but it was driven to give back insights, learning experience to anyone that chooses to spend time listening to me. That was the whole part.
Yeah, very similar to me. Very similar. Apart from I have been listening to podcasts since they've started, so I've always like been a
Oh,
huge
look at you
podcasting
out with the
fan.
cool kids.
And I was like, oh yeah, I could do a podcast. And then I remember
Yeah.
James McPherson did.
Oh, yes.
He launched
James.
his
I talked to
podcast,
him.
and I was the
Yes.
first guest on his podcast, which was cool. But I was like, oh, he beat me to
Lovely.
it, and then I was like, oh. Anyway, it was COVID that made me start because I sort of got over some of my worries about like I've got to do it face to face and blah 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 blah. But
Yeah,
is there anything you would you must get asked this question a lot, and then we'll wrap up as well. Like people
sure.
often ask me about doing a podcast. What advice would you give to people if somebody was thinking maybe of starting a podcast?
Just do it. I literally said this the other day. But do have an idea or a structure in mind.
Yeah,
Because there is a little bit of work in the background. And if you don't set about kind of thinking ahead, like what is it I want to talk about? What's my strategy or my goal or my objective or my outcome? Have something in mind that you would
yeah,
like to achieve from it. That's a good starting point. There's a lot of meat that goes into it, but you do want to have some sort of goal in mind, even if it's something
yeah,
super simple like letting the world know about, a subject in particular.
yeah, yeah,
Anyone can do it. People have this false sense of like, I don't know, like thing, right? Like, oh, Christian's got a podcast, Georgina's got a podcast. They must be someone, like high up. Like, don't get me wrong, you are. But I don't see myself as anything just because I have a podcast, right? Like
yeah,
anyone can do it. Get your mobile
yeah,
phone, record yourself talking, and
yeah.
ta-da, you have a
That's done.
podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
No,
it.
exactly.
You
Yeah,
don't, yeah.
yeah. Fully agree with you on that. Yeah, I'd encourage, the more people do it, the better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get your opinions out there.
It's not an
Um,
exclusive club, right? Like,
no, build the community, help each other out. Yeah, that's what it's
yeah,
all about. That's what it's all
agreed.
about.
Definitely.
Good stuff. Well, look, thanks so much,
Awesome.
Georgina. Really enjoyed that.
No
Before we
worries.
go, what's the
Yes.
best way for people to connect with you? And other than books and podcasts, is there anything
Yes.
you want to plug?
So LinkedIn, obviously, I like to generate those critical discussions online through, videos and posts. But also, I've started my own consultancy firm in event learning, so learning from incidents and events as well. So Event Learning Australia is the website, but the aim is again to share insights, knowledge, and learning, not for you to come to me as a consultant, just to gain that information and spark that curiosity that we all need to have, regardless.
Perfect. Perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
No problems. All
Um,
right, cool
and
bananas. See you
yeah,
in.
and thanks for everyone else for joining Georgina and I, and we'll see you
Awesome.
next week for another episode.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.